What's poppin', people? It's Dante. Today we're going to be discussing how to find your style in street photography. And so I've been photographing for the past decade, traveling the world, honing in on my craft, and I've developed my own unique style. And at the end of this video, hopefully you have a better understanding of how I've developed my style, and hopefully these ideas and information I share with you can influence you to also find ways that are unique to your personal journey to develop your own style in street photography. Now, I want to emphasize right off the bat that this is something that requires a lot of time. You must go out there in the open world and photograph in order to develop your style. And what that means is you're going to have to go out there and photograph with consistency. And over time, your style will develop naturally. However, through looking at some of my photographs, looking at some photo books, looking at some behind the scenes videos throughout this slideshow, and sharing with you some practical tips and advice, hopefully this can help you develop your style along your journey. And so I've developed my style over the years through consistency and discipline and simply going out there and doing the thing itself. I think that there is no amount of studying the master's photo books or analyzing compositions behind your computer screen that's going to help you develop your style. While studying these books and studying photography can help you, I believe that it's not something that you can force. The development of a style is something that naturally emerges over time through doing the thing itself, through exploring the open world and making more photographs. And so I believe that there are three key traits that you must possess to find your style. This being consistency, right? Shooting regularly, going out there every single day with discipline, developing a routine to always have your camera with you. Essentially for the past 10 years, I've been photographing every single day without excuses. I can always slip my Ricoh GR in my front right pocket. I can always bring my camera with me despite where I may be. If I'm transporting to work, I can photograph on the bus. If I'm making a lunch break, I can photograph during my walk. There's always time in the day to photograph, and I believe having a zero excuse mindset is going to help you find your style, because essentially one must be in the flow state of production in order to find style. And so courage is a trait that I believe every photographer must possess. Ultimately, photography has nothing to do with photography. But photography has everything to do with how you engage with humanity on the front lines of life, close to humanity. And ultimately, our photographs reflect that. And with this idea of style and finding your style, I believe that you must strip down and remove all decision fatigue. What this means is you should focus on the essentials, sticking to one camera, sticking to one lens. I believe that this simple creative constraint will help you refine your vision. If you want to go out there and shoot color, strictly shoot color. If you want to photograph in black and white, photograph in black and white and commit to that. And I find that through these creative constraints, one will actually become more creative, influencing your way in which you develop your style. And so now I'm shooting in black and white, which is a complete 180 as I photographed in color for many, many years. And so over the past 2 years, I've been shooting in black and white and strictly photographing this way. And so I believe that ultimately with photography, courage at the forefront requires you to be fearless. We all have fear. We all have this fear of rejection, fear of confrontation. And in order to go out there on the streets, one must cultivate courage, and confidence, because street photography, it's really difficult to teach, as I'm starting to find out as I make these slideshows, because it really has nothing to do with photography. Street photography has everything to do with the way in which you engage with humanity out there in the world. And I believe that a more confident photographer will make stronger photographs. And ultimately, in order to become fearless, one must become courageous. And so I highly encourage you to find ways in which you can build your confidence practicing street photography. I've recently made a video on how to overcome your fear of street photography. Maybe that video can help you. And so a street photographer is fearless. A street photographer is out there in the world experiencing life. And so a lot of these photographers that I'm going to be sharing with you today have gone out there in the world, and through experiencing different photographers' work and learning from some of these masters, such as William Klein, I've been able to hone in on some of the key elements and ways in which they photographed and where they photographed, and synthesize that into my own personal style. And so essentially through studying the masters and looking at these photo books, it's inspired me to travel the world. You know, when I look at the photographs of Alex Webb and see the beautiful popping colors and different locations that he's photographed, I looked through that book and said, well, I want to go out there. I want to see the world. And I think essentially that's what these photographers and these different photos have done for me, is essentially inspired me to simply go out there into the world. And that's why I believe courage is at the forefront. And William Klein being a courageous photographer to start with here, his raw and visceral approach to the streets have heavily inspired me. And so one of his photographs here of the boy pointing the toy gun towards the camera has this gritty, raw energy in the photograph that I really do appreciate in a street photo. And so this is a photograph I personally made last year on the streets of Philadelphia, a similar scene, however, a joyous smile in juxtaposition towards the toy gun, right? And so, you know, something about William Klein's approach to photographing in a multifaceted way, where he's not just a fly on the wall, but he's very close to humanity and engaging at the scene, has heavily inspired me. And I believe that when you look at these photographs, you can tell that William Klein was there and he was present when he pressed the shutter here, and the joy and the smile of the woman is natural. And I believe that ultimately William Klein's approach and his joy is reflected in the photographs. And I know for a fact that when William Klein was out on the streets, he wasn't necessarily photographing very stealthily. You know, William Klein was very much a photographer who would engage with humanity. And I find this to be one of the key traits from William Klein that I've picked up and adopted personally. And so you can see here this behind the scenes video of me under the boardwalk in Coney Island, holding the woman speaker as she dances, photographing with my friend, and having a great time at the scene. And this woman reminded me almost of that laughing photo that you just saw of William Klein. And so you can see the way I engage with humanity on the streets. I don't necessarily remain this fly on the wall when I photograph. You know, sometimes I do, but sometimes I don't. And here's a situation where I take my Ricoh out, I'm filming the behind the scenes of this beautiful moment between this couple dancing. And it was something that I've adopted through William Klein's approach to life, through him being playful and being there and being present when he pressed the shutter, you know, where I find this to be a great way to get close to humanity by being open and not hiding the fact that you're practicing photography. And so for my personal taste and my style, I appreciate a photograph that's close, that has not only a physical closeness in the photograph, but an emotional closeness in the photograph, where I'm open and eager to get close to people, to have conversations, and to photograph and uplift humanity in the frames I make. And ultimately, when I'm out there, I'm looking and observing and living my life, and I'm trying to photograph life. And so by getting close to people this way, I'm able to create these kind of frames. And so getting closer and closer was something I really wanted to do early on. And so one of the first photographers that I became very inspired by was Larry Towell. And Larry Towell's documentary approach to the streets have heavily influenced me. And so you can see in these photographs during this flip through of the Mennonites, one of my favorite photo book of all time, he's inside the homes of this Mennonite community. He's photographing at a close proximity, but he's not just physically close to the people he's photographing. There's an emotional closeness here, and that resonates within the frames. And so there's something about his approach and getting close, not only by being close physically, but emotionally, that has inspired me with his documentary approach to photography. And so one of the photographs that I love from him is right here on the screen of this child, you know, lying as the worker is, you know, working with the pickles here. And, you know, there's this closeness that you can feel in the frame. There's something about the emotional feeling and, you know, not only the visual impact of the photograph, but the emotional feeling in the frame that I appreciate. And so one of the things I did in my journey, and here's a photograph I made in Jericho during my time living in Israel and volunteering in Palestine, that I was close and intimate at a scene and photographing indoors in somebody's home. And, you know, through being open and playful and engaging closely with this community and building trust, I was able to make more intimate frames that have this emotional closeness. And so you see here, I'm sharing with you a slide that shares my Instax camera. There's a photo of me next to this woman in Jerusalem. I have an Instax photo I made of her. And the way in which I essentially started making my strides to photograph with the documentary approach was by using an Instax camera as a way to build trust and gain access to certain situations to photograph. And so this is something very natural that I learned, and something that I essentially learned and used out of necessity, really. As you go into these foreign places and different communities throughout the world, it's very awkward to just go into a place and start getting close and photographing without asking for permission. However, by introducing the Instax camera to my workflow, I've been able to gain trust immediately upon entry, and it became this way in which I've worked throughout all of my journey, and it's a very practical way in which I've adopted the use of an Instax camera to make more documentary photographs and gain trust and get close in order to photograph these more intimate, emotionally impactful moments. And so here we have a frame from The Mennonites by Larry Towell of this couple kissing, and then one of my photographs here outside of the mosque. And so I would go to the mosque every single day and pray and learn, and I was observant, and I would spend time after prayer and drink coffee with this group of men. And as they smoked cigarettes and greeted each other and kissed each other at this emotional moment, I made the photograph. But ultimately, the way in which I engage with humanity is how I made this photograph. It has nothing to do with the composition and the visual elements of photography, but the approach and the accessibility that I essentially cultivated through my approach to photography. And I hope that makes sense, because in order to make these kind of photographs, and in order for me to develop this documentary style in photography, I really had to go out there and engage with humanity and experience life. And this is a photograph that I actually just made last week when I went to Lancaster, Pennsylvania to pick up some meat at the butcher shop. And so this was a frame I made of a Mennonite. And so, yeah, it kind of comes full circle here. And yeah, I absolutely love and appreciate that photo book, The Mennonites, because essentially when you look through that photo book, it transports you to a new world. And I think that's very powerful. And I believe that the power of photography lies in its ability to give a photographer this superpower to create a world through the medium. And yeah, when I go into that photo book and look through the images, it really immerses you in that experience, and it immerses you within the frames. And that's something that I essentially picked up from Larry Towell and developed my own personal way of photographing this way with the documentary approach. And so we have Alex Webb as one of my biggest inspirations, and I absolutely love the use of light and color from Alex Webb and the way that he observes a scene and waits patiently for different elements to combine, where when he approaches, a scene like this in Mexico, he notices the light and shadow, and, having a nuanced understanding of your surroundings and having a deep connection to light, I believe, can create more dramatic and interesting photographs. And so this is a photograph that I made in Zambia that combines very similar elements from Alex Webb's frame. As you can see, the eye of the boy is visible through that slice of light and shadow. There's a shadow on the wall in the background, and I'm photographing a similar scene of playful youth. And so essentially, what I've learned from Alex Webb's use of light and shadow and color is that when you position your body in a situation, in a place where there's beautiful golden light and shadow play, there's some magic there. There's something there that can occur. And, essentially light is out of our control, and it's very difficult to make a photograph like this because of that fact, where I couldn't necessarily pre-visualize in my head that the light and shadow play would occur on that boy's face, revealing his eye in the photograph, creating this dramatic and impactful moment. However, I noticed the light, I noticed the shadows. I noticed how when the boy moved in and out, the shadow was casting. I noticed how the shadow was looming on the wall in the background. And then just by sensing the possibility of the photograph and shooting through the scene, I was able to create something this way. And so one of Alex Webb's photographs that is more reliant on the use of color and the visual elements within the frame is here on the screen, where this boy is jumping and the shadow is looming on the wall, and we have all of the beautiful pink hues and the blue sky. And then in the background, there's this mysterious cross that's slanted, and there's something very intriguing about this frame, and it's asking more questions than giving answers. It's mysterious yet beautiful. And so one of the photos I made along my journey that is a bit similar in terms of the way in which there's an interaction between a boy and a wall and a shadow is here from East Jerusalem in Shafat refugee camp, where I was visiting time and time again in hopes to photograph the wall here. And so as the boy was throwing the baby stroller against the wall, I positioned my body in a way where I could create this frame from an angle, and the looming shadow added that mystery and that drama. And this is a very strange moment. And I think similarly to that previous photo that we viewed from Alex Webb, there's something about those decisive moments and those one-of-one occurrences that we cannot necessarily repeat again when you go out there and you make photos. These kind of things occur, very quickly and spontaneously, and making a frame of something like this becomes rewarding, and something that I appreciate in a street photo is something that can't be necessarily replicated. And so this is one of those kind of moments. And one thing I wanted to also discuss here is Alex Webb's the locations that he photographs, right? He photographed alongside a lot of different places along the border in Mexico, or, places like Istanbul, where it lies on the border of, Asia and the Middle East. And, there's something about these locations that he photographed that intrigued me. And so, being on these sort of places on the outskirts of town, near the border, this wall that separates Israel and Palestine, these kind of places and locations intrigue me as well. And that's why I fell in love with photographing in Jericho along the outskirts, on the lowest elevated city in the world, essentially, or one of the oldest cities in the world, oldest inhabited cities in the world. And so some of these locations and the places in the photographs, they have inspired me, to go where there is unknown, to go to the places that are less traveled, essentially. And I've always adored the playful photographs he's made of youth and the popping colors, and a lot of the photographs he's made of rainbows. And I've an affection for making photos of rainbows. I've made so many photos of rainbows over the years. And one of them in particular that I made, that's in the fountain here in Logan Square, Philadelphia, was of a moment of a boy leaping and playing in a similar kind of fountain. And I spent so much time photographing here, and I recognized that I could make a photograph of a rainbow because of the way that I angled my body and looked at this waterfall and the way that the light interacted at the scene. And so, similar to photographing in the fountain that you saw in Alex Webb's frame, I made this visual understanding in Philadelphia when photographing in this particular fountain. And yeah, I find that photographing these sort of moments like a rainbow, or light and shadow, and photographing in certain locations on the border and these sort of places that are on the outskirts of town, these kind of moments, I believe, become extraordinary in a photograph. And so I look to uplift humanity in the photographs I make, and I believe something I learned from Alex Webb was essentially his ability to do that in his frames. And yeah, something that I've developed and basically used in my own personal journey and style. And of course, we have his use of layering and putting together a frame from the foreground, middle ground, and background. And this is something that I believe is actually just fundamental in the realm of photography generally. And ultimately, a photograph and the photographer is simply responsible for where they position their physical body in relationship to the subject and the background. And so by positioning myself close to the boy in the foreground, recognizing that decisive moment of him leaping in and out, recognizing the pattern that exists in this fountain, and then filling the middle ground of the frame with that visual interest of the rainbow, and synthesizing the background with that beautiful temple and the fountain on the left-hand side, I was able to create a layered and dramatic and impactful photograph that has this emotional feeling of joy, but also a visual impact through the way in which I used layers at the scene and formed this composition. There are a few films that have inspired me along my journey that I remember watching very early on, two of them being The Salt of the Earth by Sebastião Salgado, and one of them being War Photographer by James Nachtwey. And so we're going to look at some of James Nachtwey, and honestly, I find that he is one of, I think, like the best photographer ever. Essentially, like his work is incredible and something that's inspired me heavily, and I'll never forget watching the movie War Photographer and seeing him photographing in certain situations, whether it was conflict at war in Palestine or photographing funerals in certain situations that were more dramatic and emotionally charged, as a photojournalist, that have inspired me along my street photography journey. And so here's a clip from War Photographer where he's photographing at the front lines of conflict in the West Bank. And essentially, after seeing some of these clips and watching this movie, especially with even Sebastião Salgado, which I don't have any clips from here, and just the way in which they traveled the world and experienced life on the front lines in these certain situations, essentially it just inspired me to go out there. And, when I was watching these movies early on, I was like, I want to go out there and see this thing. I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to go out there and photograph and explore the open world. And it's essentially inspired me. And this is one of the photographs that James Nachtwey has made of the conflict in the early 2000s in the West Bank. And here's a photograph here's a behind the scenes video of me photographing at the scene at the border of Calandia, a similar scene of the rocks being thrown and the conflict situation between the Israelis and the Palestinians, is something that I actually went out there and did myself. And so, there's something about going out there and doing the thing itself and mustering up the courage and the fearlessness to explore the world is something that James Nachtwey's work and the movie War Photographer has inspired me. So here's a photo I made on the front lines of conflict in the West Bank, here at the border of Jericho. And so one of the photos by James Nachtwey that I find to be emotionally and visually impactful is this photograph here of this funeral scene of the woman mourning. However, you can see that there are these elements of hands throughout the frame, of the gestures, from the foreground, middle ground, and background. And then finally on the wall, we have those two hands that are pasted on the wall. And, there's something about these situations and these places and these moments that have inspired me along my journey. And I've always wanted to photograph humanity closely, and to photograph in these situations, one must go there and do the thing itself and essentially see the world. And so in order to see the world and to make these kind of photographs, I decided to volunteer along my journey, where I volunteered on a kibbutz in Israel and spent time on the farm, milking cows, tending their gardens, landscaping, and then volunteering in Jericho in a Palestinian youth hostel, and living amongst a group of brothers, sleeping on the floors of mosques in Jericho, going from masjid to masjid for a few weeks, learning about Islam, volunteering with the Peace Corps, and traveling to Zambia, Africa, and photographing funerals and baptisms, and living under a thatched roof, under God, along one tribe, sharing the land here in Luapula province. And, I learned the local language. I integrated myself in this community very deeply. And I believe this is how I've developed my style, and it's all through my approach to humanity and being there and going deeper and deeper with my practice. And so this is something that inspired me from viewing War Photographer by James Nachtwey, by looking at the movie The Salt of the Earth by Sebastião Salgado. It's essentially inspired me to go out there and to see the world and experience life and humanity on the front lines of life. And here's a photograph I made of a funeral scene of a man mourning in Zambia, Africa. And so essentially what I've done to develop my personal style in photography was, by looking at these books and looking at these movies and looking at a lot of these photographs, it's essentially just inspired me to see the world. It's inspired me to travel, but not to just travel as like a tourist or somebody that just passes through one time and does some street photos very quickly. But I've developed a way of working where I spend a lot of time intimately in a certain place and immerse myself in different cultures. Even last year when I traveled to Rome, I spent 2 months and lived amongst an Italian family and was trying to learn the local language, Italian. And when I travel to places, I spend lots of time there. I try to get as close to the life there as possible, essentially. And so we're going to look at a video here of some footage that I've recorded behind the scenes during my journey in Zambia as a Peace Corps volunteer.
Press. Natendwa nechichalo ala mwaba fyokuchula ekolo musomba umwabe nganda yandi natendwa nechichalo ala mwaba fyokuchula inendi mwila myulu pesonde tepa mwandi nalikwate nganda yandi umusumbo walulumi inendi babulendo uwako yako molo uko Yesu akansendela esansa ishape
ishaba baleni nte ishaba polo batshwalelo baleni badiko na badiko nesi abasangwa mu beshamba batshwalelo ekulomba kwesu kuli mwe Kristo mfumu Yesu amen amen.
Bueno.
Game?
Ah, o pano na foto.
Ciao mama. Vinci machita o Lucello.
O Lucello, ma per poche gaidi.
Oh, bueno. Baş mı gelin koy bak. Okay. Nailina vuka. Tamam.
ule ufa winwe chevu
11 o'clock. Main service 9.
nabengira hapa wabula mfate mimi iwe
No. Mufi.
Sarana marele ukuchula pano chalo
Yatupesha mano
echo inebane de kabila unda musumba umushaba manuele no kuchula bane
alatika wa misha
chinemayo
alatika wa misha ekulu musumbuyo umwane nanda yangi natendwa nechichalo alamwawa fyakuchula ekulu musumbuyo umwane nanda yangi natendwa nechichalo alamwawa fyakuchula
Nagabil. Mwashubukeni. Good morning. And so, yeah, as you could see in that video, under those tarps and those tents that were erected with sticks and poles, and I spent 2 weeks sleeping under these makeshift tents and drawing my water from the well for over a year, and living under a thatched roof and spending time in this community, learning the language, becoming intimate at the scenes that I photographed. That's how I was able to make these photographs ultimately. It's like, if you want to make a photograph that describes the human experience, one must live and explore the human experience in its multifaceted ways. And so by going out there and volunteering with the Peace Corps, I've had an enriching experience that not only has taught me about self-sufficiency, and not only have I learned about different cultures and integrated myself in these communities and built new skills and I was there working as a fish farmer and, teaching people aquaculture and essentially developing programs to create food security in these places where protein is scarce. And I was there with my camera, in certain situations and made photographs of these things. And, I was there doing something, I was there learning something, and then the camera was just kind of there with me. And, as I experienced life, I made these photographs. I wasn't necessarily only there to make photographs, but I decided along my journey that I really want to go out there and see the world and do the thing. And so, yeah, I essentially did that. And I find that this is the power of photo books, is that they inspire you to go out there and to explore the world. And so, one of the photo books that have heavily inspired me is The Suffering of Light by Alex Webb, as it's 30 years of photographs all throughout the world and all different countries and places. And, there's such beautiful images in here with vibrant color and light and, different places and people that, have inspired me to go out there and explore the world, essentially. And so, as we wrap this video up about how to develop your style in street photography, I must stress the process of discovery, of going out there and photographing and putting in the hours, making those 10,000 pictures or spending those 10,000 hours. There's something about the process itself and actually doing the thing each and every day. And ultimately, through practice and discipline and consistency, your style will reveal itself in the process. And so over the past 2 years, I've already made 260,000 photographs. I'm still going, I don't stop. And I'm making a brand new body of work in high contrast black and white, and going from this more documentary approach to photography to an abstract artistic approach to the medium, and making more minimalist compositions and photographs. However, the things I learned along my journey of photographing out there in the world and photographing with this documentary approach to the medium are influencing the work that I make now. And I feel as though I have this very well-rounded sort of understanding of street photography and can push the boundaries and break the rules. And so you must go out there and continuously photograph in order to develop your style. For me, I am in a stream of becoming, of photographing each and every day with consistency. And with repetition and practice, you can create your own vision and your own unique style. And so I'm pushing myself over the past 2 years with discipline, and limiting myself to photographing in high contrast black and white is allowing me to cultivate a new way of photographing. And so consistency is everything. If you want to make photos more consistently, you got to go out there each and every day. Here I have a screenshot of my iPad Photos app of just the past couple of weeks, and you can see I haven't missed a day. I really don't. I can't remember maybe one or couple times out of the year I miss a day of photographing. But I really am consistent, and I just want to emphasize that I do this thing. I'm not just like sending time out of the day to go make pictures. I'm obsessively making pictures. It's something that, this is my life. Like I live and breathe photography. If you want to develop your style, well, you have to fall in love with life. It's not even about the photography. It's like, for me, photography, it just fuels my lust and my love for life itself, because I have this excuse to go out there and get close to humanity. And so consistency is everything. Falling in love with life, to me, is what's going to provide you with the ability to develop your style. There's no amount of studying that can do this trick for you to develop your style. You really have to love life, love humanity, and go and you'll ultimately want to go out there with curiosity and courage each and every day with consistency and actually do the thing. So I just want to emphasize that I really be about that. And so that my personal approach now is, I photograph with speed. I'm photographing with this minimalist workflow where I'm shooting these small JPEG files with high contrast black and white baked into the camera to give myself a new creative constraint to allow me to develop my own unique style. And so creative constraints, maybe to just wrap things up, will help you as a practical way to develop your style. Sticking to color or black and white, sticking to a certain focal length. These decisions, they will ultimately influence you in the way that you develop your vision. So I highly encourage you to give those suggestions a try and stay disciplined and consistent with your approach every day. And just keep going. Keep making photos, keep moving forward, never stop exploring, never stop remaining curious. For me, the ultimate goal of my street photography is to increase my curiosity by 1% each day. Where every single day when I wake up in the morning, I treat it like a miniature birth, like I was just born again, and everything I see is new again. And, the challenge with street photography is essentially, can you walk the same mundane lane every single day, but still find something to uplift in a photograph? It's difficult and grueling if you're going out there with an attachment to the outcome. But when you detach from the results of the photographs and you enter this stream of becoming through photographing more and to continuously move each day in this flow state of production, you will develop your style. So essentially, stop dwelling and wondering if you're going to make a good or bad photograph. Just go out there and make more photographs. And so to wrap things up, simplify the process, strip down to color or black and white, use one focal length, study the greats, look at some great photo books, check out those 2 movies I recommended you, and then put yourself out there, go out there and explore the world. Maybe if you're curious and you want to travel and you want to explore the different parts of the world, I highly encourage you to volunteer your time, go out there and spend a couple months, a year in a location if you can, join the Peace Corps. I highly suggest it. It was one of my most incredible experiences that I will never forget and always cherish for the rest of my life. And then finally, one must be disciplined to develop a style, by being disciplined and going out there without the decision fatigue of, should I use this lens or this camera or that camera? Just stick to the damn lens, stick to the damn camera. Don't flip and flop between color and black and white. This is critical. Okay, so you must be disciplined and consistent with going out there. And then finally, courageous. Ultimately, photography, it has nothing to do with photography. It has everything to do with the way in which you engage with humanity and go out there and experience life itself. And the photographs we make, as much as there's, these visual elements within our compositions, within the 4 corners of our frames, I believe a photograph is a reflection of our courage, a reflection of our heart. And whenever I look back at my photographs and I'm analyzing the frames that I made in Philadelphia, here in my hometown, I remind myself that life is outside of the 4 corners of the frame. Life is outside of that box. And so recognize that there are endless and infinite possibilities in the world, and you have the ability to go out there. All you need to do is move and to never stop exploring. And, there's just so much to do, so much to see, and so much to explore and to photograph. And I encourage you to go infinite, go beyond the horizon, explore the unknown, and find yourself in wonder and awe each day, like a big kid with a camera, forever curious. This to me is the art of photography. It's remaining curious and remaining engaged and in love with life. And so hopefully some of the ideas and some of the thoughts I have shared with you today can help you find your voice, find your style, find your vision. And thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.